Learn what Bitcoin is, how it works, and why it matters. Bitcoin 101, your ultimate guide to the fundamentals of blockchain.
Greetings, everybody. This is Christopher Messina coming at you from the Messy Time Studios. As ever, broadcasting from the beach in the last free state in America, Florida. It's the end of July 2023. I am joined in the studios today by Zach Resnick, who, among other things, is part of Unbounded Capital, and he is coming to us with excellent connectivity from the wild jungles of Mexico. So, Zach, thank you so much for coming on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Life is good. It's another bright Monday here in the Mexican countryside.
That's fabulous. So, gotta ask, you're living in Texas mainly, and Texas is just too cold for you this time of year? You had to get down to Mexico?
As people might have seen, I think something like June or July this year was the hottest month in Texas in recorded history. But I actually going to make an addendum there because while I've lived in Texas for almost the last 3 years, this is actually the start of a new journey, and I will no longer be living in Texas moving forward. Austin was very good to me. It's a great place, but on to other places.
So what's next? What's the most kind of interesting thing that you've been working on? What we for background for the listeners, we met a few weeks ago, actually a month or two ago, at the London Blockchain Conference. We were both speaking about a range of things and application for BTC and kind of blockchain in general. So a lot of enthusiastic conversations around dinner after that. And I think somewhat like me, Zach has been involved in lots of different entrepreneurial ventures. Would it be fair to say a lot of them have kind of been linked around blockchain technology, or is that an inaccurate statement?
I don't know if a lot have been linked around blockchain technology. The main link is just me really enjoying, the area and it being kind of an endless playground for learning.
Oh, not a bad reason. Are you a computer scientist by background, or how did you get involved with some of this tech?
So poker is actually what first got me into Bitcoin and blockchain. So from a very young age, arguably an illegal age to be playing poker for money online, I was very into poker. I started playing with friends just in person in New York State where I grew up when I was like 12. By the time I was 13, I was, playing online poker for real money, hiding it from, my parents and others.
That's fabulous. Can I ask,
yeah,
how at that age, given your age now, like how were you able to do that? Did you need an on-ramp with a credit card or something, or how did you get in?
So at that time, I mean, I'm sure they still exist, but at that time, that was like the absolute like poker boom. So, I'm 30 right now. It's 2023. So about 17 years ago, we're looking at like 2006, which is like the year right before when the guy whose literal name was Chris Moneymaker won the World Series of Poker. And online poker was growing and growing, but that was like the singular event where you had Chris Moneymaker win the World Series that just like kind of took everything to a new height. And you had Jamie Gold win, for $12 million. So at that time, the average skill level of poker players and the amount of resources available to people compared to now was a tiny, tiny fraction. So basically just using kind of my intuition and following some fairly straightforward rules, I learned from any poker player will know or poker player's been around for a number of years, the forum 2+2. So 2+2 was kind of where a lot of, poker, basically all online poker legends from back then would share strategy and talk and learn. And I primarily played a certain format that was definitely like the least complex of all the different formats. It's called a sit and go. And basically, you started with 9 people, and if you got to second or first, 20-ish% of the time, you were making really good money on average. And back then, it just wasn't that hard to do that. So I kind of just stayed in my lane and kept enjoying that, making money secretly, staying up late,
That's great. Dragging yourself into high school, exhausted the next morning.
Yeah. And then I, ended up kind of taking a break from poker to just live my life, focus more on music, and kind of got a really rude awakening when I thought I had this giant pot of money waiting for me when what's called Black Friday happened. and not the, the stock market Black Friday, the 80s, but the 2011 Black Friday, where the Department of Justice, shut down the websites of every major online poker sites, and seized, the assets of them and of poker players. And it took, a while for you to be able to claim your assets. And,
Right.
if you were an underage kid playing on your own name without any, supporting documentation, it wouldn't necessarily be advisable to go and claim those assets later.
So the DOJ once again giving us one more reason why they should be abolished.
Perhaps. And that's kind of the link to, getting like crypto blockchain, where in 2011 I didn't learn about Bitcoin, but I did shortly after that. But that was kind of an early lesson in counterparty risk, where at the time it was like, oh my God, all the money that I've like earned, saved up for like a year and a half of extremely hard work went up in smoke. And that probably prevented hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of losses that I might have incurred if I didn't learn that lesson around, so that made it so when I started doing, crypto trading in 2016 and arbitrage, that I would not keep any crypto on an exchange for a second longer than it had to be, which allowed me to make money with arbitrage with, over 10 different exchanges that, shut down, of which one was like actually like the founders like stole the money from the exchange. So of course I still could have been nabbed for a little bit, even with taking precautions, but probably if I didn't have that experience, I would have just kept the money on the exchange.
So are you thanking the Department of Justice for giving you the impetus to implement risk management?
The Department of Justice, I have a poster of them in my bedroom. I look up to them, more than almost anyone else in the world, Chris.
Is that the one where they're holding flaming swords in front of the Garden of Eden? Or is that a different one?
I kind of had an artist commission my own special one just because of my really extreme love and passion for the DOJ.
I hear you.
Maybe over drinks we could talk about
I
it.
think we should. I mean, maybe it's time for like a fan club. You don't want to go all fanboy on the feds, but they're weirder things. But anyway, away from our love of the DOJ. So you were then able to start trading crypto, and you were seeing the very vast differences, I imagine, between bid and ask on the various exchanges, and that's where you were committing your arbitrage. Or how did you decide to just kick into that?
So let me just kind of get us to there a little bit, because there's some helpful background. Right. So yeah, Black Friday happens. Within a year or so, I learned about poker from, playing poker in college with founding Unbounded Capital, partner Jack Lasky, who also grew up playing poker, perhaps not fully legally online with his friends in Cleveland, Ohio.
I got to tell you briefly, Jack, when he told me that what he had done in his youth with poker, it was one of the kind of the best backstory reveals I've ever had. He's a great guy. He's kind of very mild mannered, but like when you think about it, perfect poker player. That's where the term poker face come from, right? When he told me that he'd been like hopping around to private games, I was like 18 or 16. I was like, wow, it's awesome. But anyway, sorry, go ahead. You had...
So many of those private games we hopped around together. So we went to school in Ohio together and studying poker, which led to studying blockchain. But in between there, as I'm getting more seriously into poker, I learned that some of the higher stakes pros that traveled, especially internationally for games, before they get hosed on FX fees, and now they were just, hey, I'll give you some cash, you give me some Bitcoin, and they were doing that. And rather than get hosed on fees, at that time, you were, for the most part, benefiting from upwards trajectory and volatility. So you had people that were kind of these typical poker players that would, look at every single little minutia for the time they're playing poker, but then leave like a $20,000 brick in their, luggage and forget about it of cash, or they, have 5,000 Bitcoin that they just forget about. And, kept hearing these stories of people kind of like Bitcoin not just being this thing that went up, but was something that actually provided kind of value for them. Sure. So this was always in the back of my mind as something cool, but, I was playing poker, I was playing music, I was doing some travel stuff. Like I didn't have time to get involved in all this Bitcoin shit. So between that
poker and music, I have the feeling my youth was misspent. But go on.
Grass is always greener. I spent a lot of time studying and playing poker and music, which meant not a lot of time, with other people. I'm trying to make up for that, these days.
Fair enough. Then no one gets everything. Fair enough. Okay.
Exactly. So, once I turned, when I was 18, I had the opportunity to live and work in Israel and Palestine for a year. and that like radically changed my life for the better. It made me really have a love and appreciation for other cultures and spending time in other places. So when I got to college, I didn't really have any money, and I wasn't really raking in the poker dough, at the beginning of my freshman year, but I really wanted to travel again. So I looked into different ways that you could start kind of traveling for free or for heavily discounted rates, and discovered the world of credit card, miles and points, and credit
Right.
card churning, if you're familiar with that kind of subculture of you're kind of churning the credit card bonuses like you would a cow's udder.
Right. Fair enough.
And by the time I was finished with college, I opened over 200 credit cards, and basically since then I've been traveling around the world for free in business and first class. So this
Wow.
does relate back into crypto, because the way this all works is actually the Hasidic kind of miles and points trading underworld.
Right.
So especially with the recent Netflix show Rough Diamonds,
Right.
everyone's probably top of mind for some, or at least everyone knows that Jews have been kind of at the forefront of the diamond trade, for many hundreds of years.
Yep.
And there's a few things that kind of give especially the religious Jewish population a huge advantage, which is an extreme degree of like trust and earned trust within that community.
Yep.
So Hasidic Jews can effectively have much lower COGS, because you can leave $1 million diamond in your competitor's store, and because they're a fellow religious Jew in your community, you don't have to worry. I guess maybe Rough Diamonds paints a different story sometimes, but for the pretty much every religious Jewish diamond person, you're not going to screw over a fellow Jew. A
Right.
goy, maybe, but not a Jew.
Not without even thinking about it. You kidding me?
So you have this kind of
Buyer
high
beware.
trust.
Punishment for 600 years of discrimination over usury as tax collectors in Europe.
Hey, more than 600 if we're counting, but
I'm going back to kind of the Franks. So right after that, medieval. So
Yeah.
post 1400. But anyway, go
on. So so you have this as kind of a great competitive advantage for industries like diamonds. You have the trust. You also have kind of an extreme desire to be able to make money within your own community and not have to be reliant on Goyish governments, again, for obvious reasons, looking at history.
Yep.
And then also just kind of a general, cultural value of, trying to find loopholes and, beat the systems. And a lot of the ways all types of Jews, religious or not, take that as trying to perhaps pay as few taxes as they legally or not so legally can. So you kind of combine all these things.
Hey, if government wants more tax revenue, they should fix the tax laws and take all the loopholes out. It's their problem.
So these are some of the factors that made religious Jews incredibly, successful in the diamond trade, and that have also made them incredibly successful in the much less known and, of course, smaller miles and points trade.
Right.
So, Chris, do you have an American Express or Chase or one of these cards that earns you
Sure,
points?
of course.
So when you earn these points, some of the cards allow you to transfer to a family member. Some of them allow you to transfer to up to 3 friends, some to you, but you definitely can't transfer it kind of willy-nilly.
Right.
Technically.
They don't want you to trade what is a commodity. So they're trying to limit its commoditization by putting some what they think are limits on where you can give it.
Correct. And these are all terms of service limits. So there's been, similar to card counting, lots of court cases affirming the legality of trading these things, even if it's against the TOS. So as you can probably surmise based on how I'm talking about this, religious Jews trade in mass these miles and points. Right. So if you're, a religious Jewish guy, you're a successful business owner, you spend maybe $1 million a month on a credit card for various business expenses, but you're not kind of jet setting around the world in business and first class, staying at luxury hotels. You're going to like Boca once a year and maybe Israel, once a year, once every 2 years. You have lots of miles and points that if you, weren't to use them kind of for your own travels, you're going to get around, or if not exactly, 1 cent per point. So then they know their, neighbor or someone in the community and say, hey, I'll, buy all your points that you're not going to use for your own travel. And rather than you get 1 cent when the statement credit hits days in the future, I'll give you cash for that right now at 1.05, 1.1 cents per point. And, that's a great deal. Sometimes it's actually literally for cash and not an electronic form of cash, but with actual cash.
Cash.
And yes. And then that broker will then either transfer, those transferable point currencies to various mileage programs for their own clients as travel agents. But for the most part, these are brokers that then work with travel agents like, what my, company is now called FlyFlat, where we're effectively buying various miles and points for between like 1.1 and 1.3 cents per mile or cents per point.
Yep.
And then the cost of us doing that, both the actual cost of the miles and points with the additional operational stuff, can, for certain flights, especially long haul international business and first class tickets, come in at substantially less than what the retail price
Right,
is.
the retail
So
ticket.
I was kind of doing all this arb like a lot of people have, and like what all the bloggers like the points guy, just for yourself.
Yep.
Because none of the bloggers that are having all these agreements with Amex or with the airlines are ever going to say, hey, violate their TOS and get more value than what you should. What they do is they basically say, hey, like, here's how you can get all this value. We're going to make it seem like all these miles and points are really valuable. But if you're not flexible and you don't spend the time to really become an expert, you're probably just going to get around 1 cent per point on average.
Yeah.
So I was kind of, becoming an expert in this. I launched a couple of consulting businesses while I was in college to help others with the knowledge that I gained, both, individuals traveling for vacation and business owners to increase their return on spend via credit card points. But then I attended a Shabbat lunch and I was like telling this visiting rabbi from Oregon that was in Oberlin, Ohio for whatever reason. And he's like, hey kid, you're doing this just for yourself? Don't you know about any of the brokers in the community? I'm like, what
That's
brokers?
awesome.
What are you talking about?
What do you
And
mean?
then
They're everywhere.
yeah. So I'm from New York. I'm not, from New York City, but he's like, okay, you're going home, kid, in 7 weeks for your break. Okay. Here's, after Shabbos, of course.
Off to Borough Park you go.
Yeah. Borough Park and Crown Heights, basically. I made some stops, and then it took, close to 2 years to get vetted by the community, because despite the fact that, I'm a, Jewish man, I'm not a Hasidic Jew. So
Oh
there's
yeah.
only like a single digit number of non-Hasidic Jews that kind of have full access and full trust within this kind of Hasidic miles and points underground liquidity world. And, me and my business partner
One
at
of the
FlyFlat are one of them.
best sentences that has ever happened on this show. Thank you. Baruch Hashem.
Baruch Hashem,
Go
yeah.
on.
Well, you could thank our friends in New York, for that.
That's just the greatest sentence I've ever heard. Oh God. Yeah, it took me a long time to get accepted by the community for a range of reasons, but not for the miles and points, just Borough Park in general. Anyway, go ahead.
So that kind of gave me the insight of like, hey, now I can actually, instead of just use these miles and points to my own benefit and maybe a friend or something, and instead of just advising others, because as I did make good money for my consulting business, but it's not really scalable. You kind of have to have really, really strong referral or like, a strong existing degree of trust. It's like, hey, open up your books to some fucking college kid
Yeah.
and he'll tell you to earn thousands of dollars. Like, then I'm now as a busy business owner spending more time where that product before, and there's all sorts of products and all sorts of like bloggers that are experts to try to monetize their expertise, typically with something that's $100 to $200 an hour. And it's
Yeah.
just a tough business because no one's ever happy, because fundamentally what they want is someone to take care of it for them and to get a deal.
Yeah.
But unless you're comfortable violating the T's and C's, you're not going to get that deal, without a lot of your own work.
Right.
So then that was the insight that's like,
Which
oh,
rapidly
wow.
evens out depending on what you do for a living. All of a sudden you're like, yeah, I saved 30% on my first class flight. Jesus, I should have just booked the damn flight.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was like the biggest reason I couldn't get business with my like consulting business, which was like, hey, this sounds great. I understand you could almost certainly get me another 30K in points a year. I don't want to fucking deal with this. So
Yeah, no
good luck.
thanks. And it's an important point for people to think about, especially kind of younger folks who are embarking on a new business. It's not just is there a need, it's what's the cost of effort to get there, right?
Yes.
So there's a lot of things that are practicable if you have infinite time and infinite money, but no one has either. Right? So it's an important point you're making about how to think about a business opportunity. Like it may Steve Martin said it best in the 70s during his stand-up. He said, I'm getting into commodity trading. Got into steel. I bought it at 2 cents a ton, sold it at 3. I had to store it on my front lawn, which is a pain in the ass. But like in theory, you made a profit. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, the richer you are, the more saving time is more important than saving money.
Oh
And
God, once
yeah,
your basic needs are taken care of, everything else is like, psh, are you kidding me? I'm gonna mow the lawn and cut the palm trees that don't stop growing, or I'm gonna pay a guy to do it. It's not even a thought.
yeah. Well, you and I might live that way. Unfortunately, I think the majority of people that have lots of resources that didn't inherit that money, they got there by working a lot and have a hard time turning it off. I know I certainly have. So that's
Not true with
always
a
a
lot.
struggle. Maybe not for you.
I never stop working. The reason I'm not going to mow my lawn is that it's not a value added hour of my day in
Yes.
comparison to what I could be doing, and so I don't bother to do it. Right.
Yes.
So anyway, but go
Um, so that kind of got me to then, okay, I'm not necessarily going to start this new business, but hey, I have some like rich friends, some of that are making it in crypto, that are kind of younger and live kind of a crazy life. And every now and then I'll spend 30 to 60 minutes of my time and broker a ticket for them and make a grand or two per ticket. So it didn't become a full-fledged business, but as far as an hourly rate goes,
That's
I
pretty
definitely
good.
couldn't beat that.
Yeah,
uh,
$2 grand an hour is not bad.
no, it's not. And then that kind of got me to, getting connected with this broader Hasidic world. So at first, I'm getting networked within, personal relationships within people mainly in Brooklyn and the surrounding kind of tri-state area. But eventually, as I get the full trust and get into more, secret WhatsApp groups and things, I'm now interfacing with Jews in London and, Tel Aviv and Buenos Aires, which kind of gets us back to, how I got into crypto, which is when I first,
You
when I then got,
do realize for a certain audience that hopefully is not my audience, you are reinforcing the protocols of the Elder Society. I just want to put a disclaimer on this that that's not what this is about. Not about world control. It's about cheaper tickets. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, it's not about world control. Got it. Okay.
Oh, just
We
about
have
cheaper
Goyim
tickets.
listening. Okay, yes, no world control.
No
Got it.
world control. Just cheaper tickets. That's it. Sure, a little violation in terms of service, but who doesn't do that?
Exactly. Yeah. So then it was actually again through the Jewish community that I got into Bitcoin, where I was, spent time in Israel, a lot of friends there, a lot of people there, and my mom actually had her first film that she worked on, a documentary at the Jerusalem Film Festival. So I went to kind of support her there and visit some friends. This is now the summer of 2016, and I stayed at an Airbnb that was actually owned by a guy named Stas, who started kind of the Stas protocol in Bitcoin. But he was renting it out to a guy named Yuval Ruach. And Yuval and his brother at the time were, the two sole people working on this little startup called Bits of Gold, which then, has grown to be by far the largest Bitcoin to shekel exchange. And they have operations all over the world, doing all sorts of derivatives and other stuff as well. But at the time, it was just kind of Yuval working hard, getting that spare money by renting out the other bedroom as Airbnb. Again, this is, another version of Zach where rather than kind of spending lots to be comfortable, I was like always trying to save and never wanted to spend more than I made in a given week or month or something.
Right.
So I, got there. I'm like, okay, I don't want to spend more than $90 a night, even in this expensive city. So I'm going to share an apartment with this random dude. And I'm so glad that I did.
That's awesome.
Because Yuval is just this really, really great guy. We've, kind of lost touch over the years, but the couple times I've been to Israel since I've seen him, it's been nice. But yeah, he was just so inspired about Bitcoin and told me about it. And I ended up basically that first night canceling plans that I had with friends I hadn't seen for years because I was so enthralled by his story about Bitcoin. And, by the end of my just few day stay with him, we talked a ton. I read the Bitcoin white paper multiple times. And then I mainly got excited about Bitcoin more from kind of the Rothbardian angle, more so than about the technology. That's obviously shifted over the years, given what we're doing with Unbounded Capital. But that was kind of the main.
Explain
Yeah.
those two phrases you just used. The Rothbardian? What does that mean?
So basically, I got excited about Bitcoin because it started my journey in learning about the Federal Reserve and how money works and how fucked up and how regressive, inflation and printing of more money is, from the school of Austrian. And I think some of the best analysis of this comes from the Austrian school of economics, and Murray Rothbard is, arguably the best or one of the best writers that I think can make really difficult concepts very clear to anyone, to the point where like that's who I kind of gravitated towards, because some of the other stuff, I didn't study economics. It was a little, what kind of, it took a couple classes, but it
You
was
saved yourself
over
the
my head for,
trouble of studying nonsense, so don't worry about it. Having been in the capital
okay,
markets forever, I've yet to find an efficient market, and all of their models are based on outdated math. But it made Paul Samuelson
great.
a lot of money reading textbooks, and mazel tov for him. But okay, good for you. You understood
Yes.
the Fed's Ponzi scheme and that inflation is tax. Good, you got that. Great. And from that, you did what?
So that got, so so I first got excited about that, and then really the rabbit hole I go down to after Bitcoin was more just the Fed and money, and that's what I just spent all my waking hours reading about when I wasn't working for the next couple months. But I still was excited about Bitcoin. I was like, there's probably something on the technology and how you can use it as money that would be valuable. But before I got the chance to really look into that, I realized like, oh, okay, there's this Bitcoin thing. And somehow just in searching around for it, I saw that the price of Bitcoin, especially in 2016, now we're kind of in the fall of 2016, were quite different, So you had prices of Bitcoin on US exchanges that were all, most of the time roughly on par, but still if you were a sophisticated arbitrager, you could just make money hand over fist, just being BTC between US exchanges in 2016. But I was sophisticated. I've never done that type of arbitrage before. I've kind of done miles and points arbitrage, but again, very unsophisticatedly, no algorithms, no software,
Yeah,
just texting my guy in Borough Park and making a mileage ticket happen.
classic
And
market.
then yes, so then I see that on some Argentinian exchanges, the price of Bitcoin wasn't just a little bit higher, but it was consistently like 30 or 40 points higher. This only
That's
lasted for about 9 months since when I realized it. But I was
a
like,
long
oh,
time.
I should probably, just do the very straightforward arbitrage here, which is, be able to get an Argentinian exchange account, Argentinian bank account, and buy Bitcoin for cheaper on a US exchange that was easy to use, that I trusted,
Yeah,
send that Bitcoin to the Argentinian exchange, trade that for, Argentinian pesos as quickly as possible, get those pesos off the exchange as quickly as possible. But there was a little flaw in my initial thing, which is that there is no way I can get an Argentinian exchange account, an Argentinian bank account, being
no,
some random American kid.
not a chance.
So this is where the community
I'm kind
comes
of
in.
impressed by the Argentinian banking controls. That's impressive. They didn't let you do that. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, they've been trying to stop capital flight for decades now because they've had one of the most inflated currencies ever. So it's
Right.
one of the,
They're really good at
if they
that.
put, yes, if they put some of their energy, instead of forcing people to not take their money out, to actually making their economy and monetary supply work better, might have been a better return on investment.
That would arguably apply to every single damn government on the planet right now. But go ahead.
Arguably. So then I realized, hey, I don't do a lot of business with them, but a lot of people don't know, after Israel and the US, Argentina is actually the third largest Jewish community in the world, even more so than like London and Paris. And
Yeah.
Buenos Aires still has a really strong Hasidic community. So I then was on these groups, and I think I maybe did one or two trades with people in Buenos Aires, but more so we did lots of business with people that we both mutually knew and could vouch for one another.
Right.
So I basically told them like, hey, you have Argentinian bank accounts. If you're on these groups, you probably also are not keeping any of your actual cash, only assets in Argentina. So you probably have some New York bank accounts or something. Can we work out a deal where basically I'm using all your information, I'm using your bank account, and I'm doing this ARB? And if you didn't have like a trusted friend there, that would not really be a feasible thing to do. But because of the miles and points business, that's what we're already doing. We're already giving people access to this random person's Amex account or to my Amex account. It's basically the same thing. So
Yeah.
I said, sure, 30% of the profits. And I'm like, wow, that's steep, but let's do it. And basically I had,
70.
two main people. Yeah. Two main people I did it with, and a couple others. And, I would typically have somewhere between 5 and 15% of all the money that I had, in my life on a given trade. That was what my understanding of risk and the Kelly criterion led me to think was the optimal bet sizing, given the, and luckily I never actually even had like a single amount that was like taken or confiscated by an exchange or through a bank. I would basically do the ARB. I'd initiate the outgoing wire, and then magically sometime between 3 and 10 days later, typically more like 7 to 10, I would get some wire for some random Jewish name bank account, largely based in New York.
That's great.
And then I'd run the whole thing again. So the main constraint on my returns was basically the idiosyncrasies of these random Hasidic guys to figure out how to take money out of Argentina and put it into dollars in the US. So eventually I got to negotiate it down to more like an average of 15% of the profits. Again, still a hefty fee, but one that I was happy to pay.
Sure.
And yeah, throughout that time period, I was still primarily focused on my other business stuff. But once this ARB ended, I was like, okay, Bitcoin's really cool, made me all this money, and really was a life-changing amount of money. I'm obviously a genius trader, so let me just start speculating on all sorts of other crypto bullshit.
Of course you are. Of course you are. You're a genius, you bet.
Yes,
Not
exactly.
luck and timing, genius, you bet. I've heard this movie. Go ahead.
Yep. And that led me to trading and investing in all sorts of things. Ended up, part of this, like spending about 6 weeks in the Bay Area to try to get better networked amongst more of the entrepreneurs and the technologists versus just the traders.
Yeah.
Did some consulting for a couple crypto hedge funds that somehow managed to raise tens of millions of dollars, and of course both blew up within the year. And I was like, wow, like you guys are idiots and you raised all this fucking money. How do I get a piece of this?
Yeah. Yeah. It's the intelligent person's lament when you come across a complete moron who has managed to get 50 million bucks chucked at him. Like, can I call your investor?
Yeah. Again, now looking at it more holistically, I would not envy the lives of these two fund managers that I, these brief forays with.
Ups and downs. Ups and downs.
Yeah. So now we're in fall of 2017, and basically it's like, okay, we made a lot of money in the past doing arbitrage, still doing some RB things, but it's much harder. The spreads are much lower. But I was making all this on paper money through, flipping. I wasn't actually like flipping ICOs, but I maybe did that a couple times and investing in more speculative liquid tokens. And then basically right kind of after that first kind of big 30% pullback, if you were in the market at that time, between kind of the absolute peak of like right before Christmas, December 2017 to January, I got really encouraged by my cousin, who's been a very successful entrepreneur and mentor of mine, to be like, hey, listen, like you've always done all these like cool hustles and things. I really think like you'd be much better served by going all in on kind of one business. And I think that like the investing business is the one that serves your strengths. And I always thought of myself as an entrepreneur, and I still do. So it was hard for me to imagine as like a 25-year-old to go, all in on investing and building a fund versus kind of doing the style of life I was doing before. But he convinced me, he was persuasive, and really Bitcoin Miami in 2018 sealed it as well in terms of just going there and again seeing what the competition was and just being like, okay, let's go for it. And that kind of was the initial seeds of Unbounded Capital, which now is evolved to something wildly different. But definitely, despite what we're doing now, the history of Unbounded Capital lies in kind of crazy risk taking and speculation. Like honestly, a majority of probably the crypto and blockchain funds that have had any degree of success today.
That's an excellent journey. And what's the kind of stuff that you're still running on Unbounded Capital? This is your main focus, yeah?
Yes. Yeah.
Unbounded
Capital.
What's the stuff you invested in? What has been, what you had some good wins, some losses? What's been the kind of experience you've had in terms of what you've chosen to back?
So on the, obviously on the arbitrage side of things, despite, lost money through crypto speculation, that was definitely a life-changing amount of money for me that really allowed me to start Unbounded Capital. And despite all the mistakes made, they didn't, I would still manage to, not still have a lot of money left over at the end of this kind of speculative ride. So I definitely would say my first best investment was this easy layup arbitrage opportunity. And in general, I encourage investors to, instead of trying to outsmart other people, figure out how you can be the only guy in a room, so you can just be mediocre and be making hand over fist compared to the smart guy in the room with 3,000 other smart guys or 100,000 other smart guys.
Everybody's looking for. Give me the asymmetric market that no one else is aware of.
You know what? Not as many people as you think. I think a lot of people, for a lot of good, important reasons, have been incentivized and culturally attuned to, winning and being the best amongst a competitive field. But as Peter Thiel says, competition is for losers. So, in general, there's something that I like to compete in. When it comes to making money, I try not to compete.
Fair enough.
So that was kind of the first big win. About a little under a year into getting the fund started, we kind of radically changed our perspective on crypto and blockchain, and went from, hey, we think crypto is going to save the world and it's going to oust governments, and it's, something like Bitcoin, or Bitcoin is going to be the new global money. We realized that's kind of just like libertarian fantasy world. As much as we might, want some of these things to happen,
Pure gibberish.
no chance it's going to happen. And I would still say, like, I think the vast majority of, quote, serious people in crypto and blockchain today are suffering from, wanting something to happen based on their kind of political and moral ideals versus what's actually realistic in the, the world that we live in today.
A common malaise.
So yeah, after kind of making that shift, we kind of got to the point where it's, hey, actually pretty much all things like crypto assets, tokens, making money off the kind of spread of these crypto things are at best neutral sum, if not kind of outright negative sum things, where you're just basically transferring money from dumb retail investors to yourself, whether you're investing in a business that makes money off their fees, or whether you're like literally selling them assets at, a higher amount than you originally invested, or, got into that asset.
So where are you seeing the positivity? Because I've always found, I still find, a lot of the almost sort of ideological cult-like behavior around kind of Bitcoin and crypto. They're the cynics who understand that it's a game to be played, a zero-sum game to fleece pigeons, customers.
Yeah.
And then there are others who have this sort of evangelical belief, and I just don't get it. I mean, blockchain is basically a zero-sum proof, distributed ledger. And so what? I've got 40 copies of a database around that people check to make sure which one is true. Okay, I mean, it's a nice feature and all, but like,
yeah.
And so what? I've been in the space for a long time. We use that structure for a lot of, we use it for NFTs. We use it, but for real asset NFTs, not for playing around. And so it's useful, but like, no one comes up to you and says, I got a great new idea, HTML. And like, okay, so once all the silliness shakes out, what do you perceive to be the actual kind of asymmetric, value additive attributes of BTC or BSV actually? Why is that actually substantially more interesting than kind of other sort of ways of approaching the same problem?
Well, before I answer the question, I probably should first, as someone fundraising for a fund right now, I'm going to just push back a little bit on when the silliness ends. Silliness, or the desire to make money quickly, has been a core feature of humanity from time immemorial. So, the main innovation of crypto, at least to date, and how it's been actually used, is basically making that process much easier and much more simple, and convincing people that existing laws and regulations didn't apply to doing that. So yes, the silliness might go away from crypto, but this general silliness of, hey, like, we want to make money quickly, we want to bet on this next big thing and not really spend a lot of time
Human nature
diligencing
will
it.
never change. Human nature won't change.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
I'm old enough to remember selling .com addresses for tens of thousands of dollars. So right. So there's always a get rich quick hustle, and everyone wants to believe they're going to win it. And for the people who believe when you're being pitched the get rich quick hustle, you've already lost, right?
Yes.
If you come up with it, great. But if you're being pitched it, hey, here's this great thing and how you make money. I had someone ask me this just last week about an asset management company. The guy told me he could like do better than my index funds. I was like, well, what's the proof? He's got this usual crap from a friend who's not in the financial markets. I said, well, I'm happy to talk to this schmuck for you for 5 minutes if you want. Of course, said hustler didn't want me on the phone, right? It's like, oh no, don't. Don't. I said, whatever someone tells you, don't tell anyone about this. Run, right? If you say, hey, I've got a friend who works on Wall Street, he'd like to, vet this for me, and was, oh, don't do that. They'll take it from you. Those Wall Street guys will take it. Run. And if you don't listen to that advice, you deserve to lose every penny. So I'm not talking about the hustlers and the liars. I'm talking about I guess I'm
For
not
sure.
directly, like the very excitement. Remember, do you ever see the movie The Graduate with Dustin Hoffman?
I have. It's a great
Yes,
movie.
I thank God, because it's not always a given that someone under 45 has seen it.
There.
In that movie, when his father's friend walked up to him and said, "I got one word for you: plastics. We'll talk." So when Bitcoin started to make motion, we were running a commodity hedge fund at the time, and the trade, everyone of the joke on the trading desk was Bitcoin. We'll talk later, right? So that's what I mean by the sort of over the top enthusiasm that this is going to be some radical thing that's going to make everyone rich. Right now, we're all going to retire. That seems to have come to an end, or have I missed that? And there's still some pockets of enthusiasm for that.
Oh, there are still pockets, and I don't anticipate there not being pockets for many, many years, despite all the downturns in the crypto markets and all of the, regulators going after the different exchanges and different, big crypto companies and big crypto tokens. I think that will continue. But yes, let's talk about the fun stuff. Let's talk about the stuff that we're investing in that we're really excited about.
Yeah.
So, before getting into specific companies, I think for us, the way we like to think about blockchain as a technology is that is a fundamental technology. And that means it's not something that just, marginally improves or even completely improves a single industry. It's that it's something that affects not just every industry in the global economy, but really changes the way how people interact with one another and culture around the world. So the analogy that is, I think, most present for people of another fundamental technology is the internet. Maybe right now also AI, but that's still kind of very much the beginning. With the internet, what you had was a new way to connect with people, a new way to store data, a new way to share that data with other people. And that radically changed humanity, I would argue, for the better, even if there's lots of things that have gotten worse. The net has been very positive for the world.
I would agree. Net.
So,
sorry. Net. Sorry, go on.
And the way the internet started was you had on-prem databases. So you had this, internet, which is really just a series of like 20 something different protocols, and you're connecting different people's databases that they have, on their own site.
Yep.
Then the next big revolution in the internet, arguably a fundamental technology in and of itself, was cloud computing and cloud storage. So we went from putting that data on, our own databases that we all had to maintain ourselves, to being able to kind of outsource this to some of the biggest, most sophisticated companies in the world that could benefit from economies of scale. And again, that's been one of like the fastest growing, highest margin industries at that scale, and some of the best bets you could have possibly made in private or public markets over the last 10 to 15 years were in, cloud computing companies or bigger companies like Amazon or Microsoft or Google that benefited from the rise of cloud computation.
Until Skype slaves us all.
Perhaps.
I've seen the movies. I know what's going on.
What we see as the next kind of revolution in data is, blockchain basically supercharging the internet. And instead of now us having to still go to a disparate amount of databases, like the amount of databases that we're currently interacting with right now, Chris, is probably in the over 10,000 range, if not in at least thousands. Mm-hmm. And for many of those things, that's the most efficient way to do a video call. But for some things, it's not the most efficient way. And especially when you're talking about accessing and interacting with really important and secure information, it's very rarely going to be the right way to interact with that, where you have disparate amount of databases and you have to kind of pay to access ones at different rates depending on where they are in the world. And rather than there just being one big database that was incredibly secure that you can access, whether the data's on there or hashes of the data's on there, that's what we think is kind of the next revolution in data. You went from kind of the initial internet with on-prem to cloud computation and now to blockchain. So there's lots of things kind of along the way there. And frankly, we don't have a single bet in our portfolio today that is like directly going after that problem. But in terms of like the 10, 15-year vision of like who are going to be the biggest winners that leverage blockchain technology, it's going to be infrastructure companies that are doing that. And kind of going back to our original internet analogy, the kind of where we are today is very much at the kind of onvent of on-prem internet, where the vast majority of investors are excited not about the internet with your own databases, but about intranets. And rather than invest in this kind of new more decentralized internet, we're going to invest in, bigger public companies that are building their own intranet. So we're going to invest in a private company that's doing this internet as a service thing. And there was a time where, almost 99 cents out of every dollar invested in the internet and intranet went to the intranet and not to the internet. That started to really change in like 96, 97. But that's kind of, a little bit similar to where we are today, although I think intranet investing is a lot more justifiable than broader crypto investing now, where, close to 99 cents out of every dollar is going directly into crypto assets that are basically just glorified Ponzi schemes. And then people and businesses, whether they're BTC miners, exchanges, asset managers, that make money off the kind of speculation and trading of these glorified Ponzi schemes, rather than to the infrastructure that's actually going to change the way that we interact with data in the world.
And that ties in directly to what my real world job is doing with creating an NFT around physical commodities that are produced by a mine, right? Is that a lot of these NFTs, and I keep using the term NFT because frankly it's value neutral. It is just a non-fungible token. It's asset title to something, and eventually the stigma will go away. But for a lot of people, it was pictures of bored monkeys. Well, it's not my fault that someone gave you 50 grand for a JPEG that's available for free on the internet. You paid that? Like, that's an idiocy tax. It's not my problem.
Yeah.
Our structure that we use is title to a real asset. You get actual physical commodities by owning this token. And that's also part of what I mean by silliness, right? Is that, again, having been there in the 90s, you threw .com on anything and all of a sudden it went up in value. It was ridiculous. You've done nothing different. And similarly here, you can throw a couple of buzzwords around and it's marketing fairy dust and it will get you a bump in valuation. Whereas fundamentally they're a phenomenal, can you imagine what's the dividing line of age or something like of people who grew up, my kids grew up punching touchscreens and getting crap to do, right? Like they just cannot comprehend a world where there was no internet. Like just it means nothing to them. You just cannot comprehend that. What do you mean you didn't walk around with more computing power in your hand than existed in 1945? What are you talking about? So that's cool. So your focus is really on those much needed services that are driven by faster dissemination of information in this kind of intranet world that makes that companies find use of. You really think that's going to be where a lot of the frictions in communication transfer and business are unlocked? Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think on the way to getting there will be really serious unlocks, specifically in the broader world of like fintech, payments, and gaming. And infrastructure players in those areas is what make up the vast majority of our portfolio today.
Right.
So, one example of a company, and this is, very much related to the work that you're doing now, is a company called Tokenize. So I'm sure you're familiar with Tokenize, Chris, yep. But for our listeners, Tokenize is one of the many different tokenization platforms and protocols, but really the only one that understands that the value to tokenization as a company is not being the 80th broker to put some real world asset on a blockchain. And if you look at kind of basically all the other tokenization companies, really these are kind of like more old school brokers that have made their money brokering and selling real estate and stocks. And the idea was like, hey, if we take a B, C, or D rate asset that we can't really fundraise for in traditional capital markets, and we pay a little bit of money to put it on a blockchain, maybe some fucking crypto idiots, whether they're retail or institutional, will buy that. And that's like kind of the history of tokenization in a nutshell. Unfortunately, they didn't understand what James at Tokenize understands, which is like tokenization has the potential to radically transform the way that our global financial system operates by eliminating, the need for like settlement T+2 in the ways that we know it right now, by automating.
Describe the genius at the core of our commodity NFT, which we did before Tokenized. But anyway, go on.
Before Tokenized.
Yeah, I've been in structured finance longer than they've been walking. So we've been working on structures like this for years. But anyway, let's give them their moment in the sun.
Well, it's more than just structure, Chris. So I think some of the people that have had some degree of success in tokenization that have a structured finance background, they've been smart about structure as well. The innovation from James is understanding like, hey, I'm going to be somewhat agnostic to what assets are being tokenized. I'm just going to build software that allows it to be much easier for issuers to issue, a commodity NFT, or to issue something very common like the equity of, their public company stock, or, a bond or a private market equity issuance or an option issuance, and just remove friction and remove the need to use lawyers and to spend lots of time and wait. So anyone that's listening to this that's in capital markets, whether they're, publicly traded equities, bonds, private markets, that doing some type of capital raise, doing a trade, doing an exchange is an expensive and slow and time-consuming endeavor compared to what it probably should be in 2023. So that's kind of, an example of something where, right now there's maybe not an easy into that with this kind of broader why we're super bullish on Bitcoin and blockchain over the 10, 15 years. But this is kind of one of the many infrastructure companies that will be putting that important and secure information like ownership of a given stock, and whether it's anonymous or not doesn't really matter.
People are getting across that. So a lot of that transformation will come, and many of those applications will occur, and people won't even know what the underlying technology is, much like people using their cell phones know nothing about who the IEEE are and why they create IPv6 standards. Doesn't matter to them. So we're running out of time. So if you had to leave everyone with one kind of core message about sort of what you've gleaned in the space, why you're participating and dedicating a chunk of your entrepreneurial efforts in life to things in this space and this infrastructure, what is it? What's the guidance you provide about people about how they are to either hear what people are telling them, process it? I'm not going to qualify any further. What's your general punchy advice to folks about this space?
Well, I'll give you some links to put in the show notes, Chris, but in short, like why I believe in Bitcoin and blockchain, and why I've dedicated the last, 5.5 years of my life, and will continue dedicating, many decades of my life in the future to furthering the use of this technology, and the companies pioneering this, is because I think it is one of the best bets for increasing, freedom and prosperity worldwide, full stop. So right. If that's interesting to you, you can read my piece, Why I Believe in Bitcoin, for, more detail there, because I know we're running out of time. And I would say just do your own diligence. Read, write. Writing is a great way of taking disparate ideas and really understanding what you actually think and what you believe. Don't trust anyone, especially Chris or myself, and just learn about stuff. And I give one like more tangible piece of advice that's specific to this.
That's awesome. Well, Zach, thank you so much. Enjoy your time in the Highlands of Mexico. I'm keen to see how it's all going to work out. It's a topic that draws a lot of attention and from very many fragmented angles. So your perspective is valued. A lot of the other chats we've had around the space have been much more sort of fundamental, boring techie, and this is much more focused on kind of what are the uses and kind of where they come from. So, muchas gracias.
Thank you, Chris. One more plug. If you want to learn more about all this stuff and maybe see Chris and I in person, we're putting on our big annual investor summit in New York City on Thursday, September 21st. If you're an investor, a VC, founder, and you're interested in kind of meeting us in person, learning more, meeting some more portfolio company founders, I'll have Chris put a link in the show notes, and you can apply to attend the summit there. And I hope to meet some Messy Times listeners in person then.
Amen. If we do it right, we might hook you up with some good points-driven deals on flights. So until next time, everybody, remember to save yourselves the trouble, ignore the mainstream media who are lying to you, and tune into Messy Times.
Bitcoin mining, Bitcoin wallet, blockchain, stablecoins, MetaNet, the evolution of money. Everybody is talking about Bitcoin today, but what exactly is it? Learn the basics from experts. Learn what Bitcoin is, how it works, and why it matters. Bitcoin 101, your ultimate guide to the fundamentals of blockchain.